Hi. In this video, we'll talk about anaphora, antithesis, and parallelism or parallel structure. As you're reading the speeches for this week, I want you to pay attention to sentence structure and schemes. When I say sentence structure, I'm referring to sentence types. So why might the writer or the speaker use a simple sentence, subject, verb, complete thought, or a compound sentence? Two simple sentences combined with a coordinating conjunction like and or so, or a complex sentence, one that has a dependent clause, or a complex compound, which is a combination of the previous two. So why use different sentence types? Why use a short, simple sentence versus a complex sentence? Sentence length, punctuation. I know in a speech this is difficult to unpack, but things like semicolons, periods, dashes, parentheses, and of course syntax or the arrangement of words. If you notice that the syntax seems a little bit unusual or strange, why might that be? Might that be for some sort of effect? I've included a few examples of some sentences that I think use interesting sentence structure. Let's look at the second example I have there, which is an incredibly famous example from Pride and Prejudice. It's actually the first line of Pride and Prejudice. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. Now, that might just be one of the most famous sentences in English literature because it's kind of funny and sort of ironic. Of course, it's not actually true that if you're a single man who's rich, you need a wife. But of course, people believe that that's the case. And it's not necessarily true that the opposite is true, that a woman who doesn't have money is in need of a husband. But of course, there's some humor to it. But I think that part of why the sentence has become so famous is because of the structure. It can be imitated and swapped in or substituted with different words. And then also it goes from things that are very general, truth, universal, down to single man, and then fortune, and then finally down to wife, which in this time period and given what we know about the society in Pride and Prejudice, that kind of hierarchy sort of makes sense and reveals something about the entire book and this obsession with marriage. So looking at sentences, especially sentences that seem particularly interesting or complex, thinking about what they say and what they mean, but also looking at how the structure contributes to the meaning. Let's take a look at anaphora. So anaphora is a type of repetition, and it's a repetition of the first part of a sentence or the first part of a clause or a phrase. Hopefully, if someone is using anaphora, it's for some sort of purpose, for some sort of effect. There are all sorts of examples of anaphora in literature, in articles, and of course in speeches. Speakers make use of this device all the time. So whether it's Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech with a repetition of "So let freedom ring," or a song, "There's nothing you can do that can't be done, nothing you can sing that can't be sung," we see anaphora all over the place. So repetition of the first part of a sentence or a clause or a phrase. Let's talk about antithesis. So you probably have heard of antithetical ideas before. Well, antithesis, when we're talking about sentence structure and schemes, that's two opposite ideas that are put together in a sentence. So the pair is written with similar grammatical structures to show some sort of contrast. So here are some famous examples. The first one comes from Hamlet. "Give every man thine ear, but few thy voice." Basically means listen to everyone, but don't speak. Better to reign in hell than to serve in heaven. So both of those sentences use the same grammatical structure, but there is some sort of twist. And in fact, the ideas are opposite, or they show some sort of contrast. There's something very similar to this called chiasmus, which often gets put in the same category. It's a little bit different though. With chiasmus, or the cross structure, we have a sentence like this very famous example. "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." So with chiasmus, you have the same words or the same ideas, but they're just reversed. Whereas with antithesis, you have that swap, but it's showing a contrast and they're not the same words. Let's move on to parallelism. You've probably heard of parallel structure. Maybe you've had a teacher or an editor tell you to use parallel structure. When you have a list of things, make sure that each item in that list follows the same structure, right? It just sounds better when we read it out loud. It's less cluttered. So you want to make sure that you're following the same structure when you have a list of things. So for example, you wouldn't want to say something like, my job includes making breakfast, cooking dinner, making the beds, and to care for the children, right? Because the last part of that does not follow the same structure as the other parts of that list. You can just hear how that sounds a little bit off, right? It sounds not parallel. It's not very harmonious. Here's an example that apparently came from an email originally and then became kind of a mantra or a slogan. Rosa is in Rosa Parks, sat so that Martin could walk. Martin walked so that Obama could run. Obama ran, as in ran for office, so that our children could fly. So you can see the parallelism there. Each sentence or each part of the sentence, it's actually one big sentence divided by semicolons, uses the same structure. It just sticks in our brains. It's so much easier to remember when it uses parallel structure. And if you think of lines from speeches or from movies that are particularly resonant or that are quotable, that people reference all the time, a lot of times they use these devices. Parallelism, anaphora, antithesis, they use devices like these. Okay, so I hope this helps when you start unpacking and analyzing the two speeches for this week.